Live from York, this is the Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're discussing Irish education reform and the university application process with Secondary Principal Nathan Barrett and Deputy Principal Delia Donohoe. So join us as we explore how the Irish post-primary system works today, imminent reforms to the senior cycle, and university admissions.
Live from York, this is the Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining me this evening on what is the final weekend of my summer holiday. 8 weeks of crucial rest and recovery time have been mixed with a week of swimming, kayaking and camping on the South Devon coast, finally finishing the selected tales of E.T.A. Hoffmann. Dear listener, the volume contains 3 good if very long short stories padded out with some extended arguments about German probate laws. Making progress, finally, on Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa's eccentric book of automatic writing, The Book of Disquiet, and presenting an anthology I've recently published on behalf of my college to the British Library. So it's been a busy couple of months. In the last fortnight, however, we have been living with the effects of the huge wildfire 15 miles away from us near RAF Fylingdales on the North York Moors. As of today, the country air from here to Leeds is still tainted with the smell of smouldering peat, heather and chemicals, rather than the usual post-harvest aroma of manure and fresh ploughing. When I attended Pickering Town FC's FA Cup preliminary round match against Easington Colliery last week, the smoke was so thick as to keep a higher than usual proportion of the spectators in the clubhouse as the sides slogged it out through the plumes to a goalless draw. Pickering subsequently won the replay. At one stage, the wildfire had reached a size of 5 square kilometres and triggered the explosion of at least 16 live military ordnances, as the wind has repeatedly shifted its direction from onshore to offshore to onshore again. I haven't yet been greeted with a frost-covered car in the early morning, but every day for the last week I have left the house to find the trusty term-time workhorse veiled in a thin layer of beige-coloured ash. Reports suggest that the fire, though now considerably smaller, is still burning, and the fire service are expecting to remain at the scene for another 2 weeks. I suspect the damage will be considerable when all the flames are eventually extinguished and the fire crews are back to their routine operations. Since we last spoke back in June, I think it was, I've been preparing for the changes to our English literature syllabus. Out has gone the Australian Gothic boarding school novel Picnic at Hanging Rock, and in comes Chinua Achebe's tragedy of Nigerian colonisation, Things Fall Apart. Rereading this for the first time since my undergraduate days while writing a scheme of work for our new Year 11s, I was struck by just how neutral Achebe's narratorial voice seems to be on the struggles confronting the tribal communities of Igboland and on Okonkwo's tragic descent into a kind of mad, impassioned patriotism. Having drafted my notes and key discussion points for the autumn term's lessons, I think I remember being impressed by the novel's lyricism when I first read it 20 years ago. Today, I think I'm even more impressed by its restraint, by its telling silences, and by its subtle repetitions with variation as the plot unfolds. Our students will again be tackling the same collection of 19th and 20th century poems that deal with literal and metaphorical journeys that were examined for the first time this summer. And our students will also be studying Antony and Cleopatra for the first time in Year 10. this scheme of work will be a project for someone else in my department this year. Perhaps the biggest change, though, will see me leaving the girls' boarding house where I've served as a sixth form tutor for 13 years to become a sixth form tutor to the boys in the house next door, a new undertaking that will combine with my work as head of sixth form. This could pose something of a culture shock initially, not least because the layout of the boys' boarding house is precisely the mirror opposite of the girls' boarding house at the other end of the building. Let no one say things never change in schools. The last fortnight, of course, has also been marked by the publication of A-level, BTEC and GCSE results here in England, and by supporting Year 13 students with their university choices and by advising Year 11 students on their subjects for sixth form study. My A-level results day was a fairly quiet one this year, as I consumed my mug of Yorkshire Gold tea, croissant and fig rolls in Computer Room 2 at 6:45 in the morning, having got a feel for the national picture from the presenters of the early breakfast show on Times Radio on my drive-in in the car. Our English results were excellent and produced relatively few surprises beyond the sharp hike in grade boundaries across the syllabus, and our NEA moderator was uncharacteristically fulsome in complimenting our submission this year, the first submitted via the Scan and Send software that I remember grumbling over for a full day as I stood at a photocopier scanning our submission page by page for an hour or so on what was then one of the hottest days of the year. One area where I have seen considerable improvement in examination administration this year, however, has been in the realm of requesting priority script copies from AQA in particular. This week, we advised our A-level students to request some of their scripts for checking, and students have typically been forwarded these within 24 hours of requesting them. This has surely got to be a positive development, as it has greatly assisted us in advising our students on how to respond to the various choices confronting them on results day. We will wait and see how Cambridge International get on with the IGCSE script requests we will be submitting to them next week. One thing that never seems to change, however, is the clamour for reform. Reform of the curriculum, reform of the examination system, reform of university funding mechanisms, and reform of reading and writing in the face of the constant infiltration of artificial intelligence into almost every facet of our academic lives. As I opened Office 365 on my laptop every day this month, the new landing page has brought me instantly to the latest range of AI tools that Microsoft think might do a better job of thinking for me than I might do myself. This subtle shift in user interface has led me to the conclusion that JCQ's update to its regulations on AI and its use in coursework submissions at GCSE and A-level has arrived at a most opportune moment indeed. Joining me on tonight's show to discuss education reforms in the Republic of Ireland are two professionals navigating imminent changes in the Irish senior cycle while trying to anticipate the future pathways that will emerge for the students they teach. Nathan Barrett is principal of Stratford College in Dublin. He is also a lecturer in music education at University College Dublin and a school placement tutor at Dublin City University. Nathan is passionate about the power of a holistic education and the importance of student voice and direction in education. Welcome to the show, Nathan, and thank you for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio.
Thank you, Chris, to be here. Thanks for having me.
Delia Donohoe is a secondary school teacher in Dublin for over 20 years. She's qualified in teaching classical studies and religious education and has taught in all girls and co-educational schools. She has worked as the head of support teaching for students with additional educational needs for 16 years and is in her third year as deputy principal of Stratford College. Delia continues to teach classical studies to every year group in the school. She has worked with the NCCA, the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, on the reform of both the junior and senior cycle classic specifications. She has also worked with OID, I think that's how you pronounce it, previously PDST. Delia has dedicated her time to providing a classroom space for every student to feel success in their learning and planning, and to supporting teachers in differentiating their teaching methodologies to focus on different approaches to learning. Welcome to the show, Delia. It's great to have you with us this evening.
Thanks a million, Christopher. Great to be here.
I wonder if you might start off then, Delia, by giving our listeners a sense of the current shape of the education system within which you work. The system in the Irish Republic is quite unique, and I wonder if all of our listeners might benefit from a little description of that for us.
Sure, Christopher. It's interesting listening to you talk about results coming in for your students over the last couple of weeks. We had our Leaving Certificate students receive their results on Friday, so 2 days ago here in the Republic. So our system works that from the age of 12 to 18 for most students, they spend 6 years in secondary school. The first 3 years focuses on junior cycle exams. That's the major state assessment at the end of 3 years, which most subjects have continuous assessment components, but unfortunately the percentage that goes for their classroom-based assessments is very small. It's down to 10%, and during COVID modifications were made where sometimes that percent wasn't added at all, so it all came down to the written paper. Then we have a wonderful programme called Transition Year, which is in 4th year, which most students take across the country, and then they do 2 years of senior cycle for the big exam, which is their Leaving Certificate. They usually sit 7 subjects for their Leaving Cert, and they count 6 of those in order to be offered a place in what is the CAO, is the system that offers college places here in Ireland.
Thank you. My understanding is as well that there's, in the Irish Republic, quite a specific focus on education being child-centred in the primary phase. Are you able to say a little bit about that for us?
Sure. Yeah, there's a wonderful programme called Aster in primary schools all across the country here, and both of my daughters would have enjoyed the process. Aster is very much based on the children in front of you at the age of 5 or maybe 4.5 in junior infants. So a lot of primary school teachers, they will create, let's say if they were teaching the postal system, they'll have like a post office set up in their classroom. If they're teaching the children about money, they'll set up a little shop for the children to be able to act as kind of shopkeeper and the customer. So there's a huge shift for this, as I say, the children in front of you, to plan your lessons around that. And some schools would have very good equipment for science experiments, but very much down to the resources and the teacher that is in primary school, the different types of classes.
And how much direction is given centrally to what those teachers are doing in their classrooms?
Now, I am a secondary school teacher, so I probably, if a primary school teacher certainly might be able to correct me on any of this, but there is a lot of direction in the sense that the NCCA look at Aster, so they look at the primary school right up to the student leaving at the age of 18. We also even have in our creches here, the government fund hours in the morning for children to access literacy and numeracy skills. And then that's kind of guided right through from Montessori, right through primary up to 6th class. So they spend 8 years in primary school, and there would be a set curriculum in Irish, English and maths. There would be a science curriculum that they follow as well.
So given that, what you've said already, that sense of the child being the central focus of the education experience in the primary phase, how do students typically cope with the junior cycle when they move from that primary experience into the secondary classroom? Are there any challenges involved there?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's challenges moving up into what we might call the big school, coming into secondary. But I would have seen over the last 10 years, excuse me, that the first years, who are kind of 12 or 13 years of age coming into secondary school, are much more ready for the child-centred learning. And it's great, really, because they've experienced it in the primary school. It meant that the secondary school had to change pretty quickly to make sure we were as progressive as the 5th and 6th class teachers. An example of that would be sharing success criteria with your students. So taking the mystery out of why you were teaching a certain topic at the beginning of a lesson and telling the students why I would like you to learn this, what I'm hoping you will be able to do at the end of this lesson. So asking them, is it relevant to their lives? And that's a huge change, Christopher, in my teaching practice. And that's very much based on the primary school success criteria being shared at the beginning of classes with the learners.
And what subjects did we say were part of that junior cycle again, Delia? Delia, what subjects were part of that junior cycle curriculum for the children?
Sorry, you cut out on me there, Christopher. Apologies.
I was just asking what subjects are part of that junior cycle curriculum once they join you.
Sure. So when they come into first year, there's a number of core subjects that all students have to do. So most students would take Irish, which is Gaeilge, the Irish language. They take English, they take maths, history, geography, usually a modern foreign language. Science is not compulsory. Most students do take it across all schools, but it is a choice in community colleges in particular, whether or not they take science. And then there's other subjects which they would have options of. So modern foreign languages, they could take French, Italian, German, Spanish. Obviously classical studies, which is close to my own heart, not offered in all schools, but that's an option. Nathan's subject music is another option. They can take applied technology in some schools, engineering, graphics, religious education, and visual art and wood technology. So there's a huge range of subjects, and most students would study 10 of those.
Wow, that is quite a diversity, isn't it? And do the schools get to make those decisions on what they offer, or is that something, again, mandated centrally?
Sorry, Christopher, cut out again.
I was just saying, do the schools make the decisions on what subjects sit within the curriculum, or is that, again, something mandated centrally?
Yeah, so we have to. So mandated centrally would be the core subjects, and then schools get to choose. So in bigger schools, you might have bands. So there might be 2 or 3 subjects. So you might put art, graphics, and science in a band, and the student would pick before they come in, or they might have a taster for a month and then they would pick a subject. But there are core subjects as well.
Thanks, that's really helpful as a way of setting things up for us. I might bring in Nathan here. So, Nathan, when these students take their junior cycle, those lead towards a national examination, is that correct?
Yes, so all of the subjects that students take will lead to a terminal examination. And there are a couple of what we call short courses over here, which have been developed in the last number of years, where students can take subjects such as CSPE, which is Civic, Social and Political Education, SBAG, Social Personal Health Education, which are courses that they will study throughout the 3 years of the junior cycle, necessarily take an exam in it. And as Delia mentioned, the last number of years, our junior cycle system has undergone a huge amount of change. And one of the main areas of change was around assessment. And Delia mentioned classroom-based assessments, which are essentially ongoing class work that take the form of kind of projects that are approached in second and third year. And they can account for up to 10% in certain subjects.
Thank you. And is there a clear vision on what those assessments exist for? So are they there to test student understanding, or are they there to test the school's ability to deliver an approved curriculum? How much of that balance between accountability and student progression do you see in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the terminal exam is a common exam now for all subjects apart from English, Irish, and maths, and so all students across the country are examined on the exact same paper to the exact same standard. So in that sense, there isn't very much scope for, I suppose, going beyond the boundaries of what needs to be learnt, and what comes up on the day in most subjects is what comes up on the written paper. So students are assessed in the same way. In that sense, the flexibility comes in, I suppose, in our classroom-based assessments. Speaking for myself and my own subject in music, there are 2 assessments, and one of them is based on a portfolio of composition of written music that the students would have accumulated over 2 years. And then the second one is based on, it's a project or a presentation based on the pieces of music that they will perform in the practical element of their exam. And I know in other subjects, the classroom-based assessments can take many, many forms. They can be pieces of drama, they can be PowerPoint presentations, they can be posters. So in that sense, it's much broader in terms of student access to it, and it allows students access those parts of the assessment in whichever way they might feel more strongly. Whereas, still though, all of the exams have written elements that are assessed at the end of the 3 years. So in that sense, they're all put in the same boat when it comes to that.
And when they move into the senior cycle then, Nathan, how does that change? What do they do in terms of the subject choices they make, and how have assessments previously been done there?
So in terms of the senior cycle, I suppose that's where we're seeing a big gap at the minute, is because students have come through the junior cycle where they've had a lot of choice, in terms of their CBAs. But when it comes to senior cycle, we're kind of catching up now, really, and we have what we call additional assessment components, or AACs, which will be introduced for all subjects over the coming 3 to 4 years, and these will be worth a 40% across all subjects, and these AAs. For example, the sciences are the ones that have been introduced this year, and what we believe those additional components will be research briefs. We'll have to go and research or investigate a particular area of the sciences. So it's good because I suppose it gives a more practical, hands-on approach to subjects. You're not relying solely on written exams, which a lot of subjects would have been relying on up to now, and will still rely on a new subject comes in. For example, in English, that is 100% assessed through written papers at the minute. Same with maths. Luckily, the languages, Irish and the modern foreign languages, they have an oral component and a listening or an oral component. So the idea is that the assessments are kind of moving now more in line with what our junior cycle now is, in terms of giving students more options and more flexibility. And I suppose more practical, for music at the minute, it is currently a 50% performance. For a lot of students, there are other options, but most students go for a 50% performance, which just means that, regardless of your background, your ability to read music or understand musical theory and music history, if you're a good performer, you have a really good chance, of accessing a good result. So I suppose we're playing catch up at the minute with the senior cycle reform in terms of that side of kind of alternative assessment components, or as they call them, additional assessment components. So it's catch up at the minute, and that's kind of what's causing a bit of consternation is the lack of guidelines around that. But we might talk about that in a while.
Thank you. And what about the transition year? Because that's always been regarded as a fairly unique thing within the Irish system. You're able to say a little bit about that for us?
Absolutely. So transition year is an optional one-year program. Now, a lot of schools will make the decision to make it mandatory for the students. So I suppose the distinction between the transition year and the other year are no formal examination of the transition year. It's used to promote, I suppose, a student's personal, social, vocational development, and it's there to prepare them for, as the name suggests, the transition from the junior cycle into the senior cycle. So the junior cycle as being that first educational milestone of marking your first 3 years in school, and looking forward then to the senior cycle, which is kind of, I suppose, you're on the way out of the school. But the idea is that it's separate completely from any kind of academic or exam pressure. One of the key components, I suppose, of transition year is work experience, and students all over the country businesses and enterprises all over the country are used to having students looking for their work experience. So students will go out and work for companies, or intern, pretend you might call it. But it's also a year in which schools can offer lots of different modules for students to undertake that they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to in either the formal settings. For example, in our school, we offer Chinese, we offer public speaking, self-defense, dance, first aid, sustainability, computer studies. So I suppose it's unique in the sense that there isn't a terminal examination. You're not going to be measured, I suppose, formally or in an exam setting at the end of it. But it really is. It allows students, I find, to mature and develop without any pressure. It supports self-directed learning. It allows students to become more independent. And I suppose it's going through its development as well. And, the new program now is focusing on 4 key areas and their personal growth, being a learner, civic and community engagement, and career exploration. So those are all 4 key areas which lead into kind of the idea of now we're moving towards the senior cycle, and then we're moving beyond that and out into the big bad world.
Thank you. And I might just bring in Delia here. Delia, do you notice any, I suppose, difficulty with students readapting to life in the classroom after a transition year? Is that something you experience?
Yeah, it's a great question, Christopher. I'm a 5th year ahead, so that's exactly where I'm at the moment with my guys. They've just finished transition year, and parents would ask that a lot. What is the point of this year? Is it a DOS year? Will they forget how to write an essay, their maths formulas? I think they're ready. The first couple of weeks of September is a little bit of a shock to their system, in the sense that the class is a little bit more structured than what they would have had for transition year. But at the same time, there is a whole area about how they learn, being a learner in transition year. So they're coming to 5th year ready for the challenge. They've picked subjects they really want to study for senior cycle. So I find that the students really surprise me in a good way. The parents are always very worried about that they'll find it hard to settle. But I really think that year helps them to mature. They're not coming off the back of a state exam after 3rd year. They've had that bit of a break from study, and they're kind of ready. And as Nathan said, it is that year to kind of mature and that personal growth, have a bit more understanding of what they want to do for the next 2 years in school.
And have you seen any of them develop any particular interests that you've had to redesign your extracurricular program to accommodate?
Sorry, that's my fault again, Christopher. It keeps cutting out.
Sorry, I was asking Delia, when they come out of their transition year, presumably there'll be some interests they've acquired that the senior cycle curriculum won't fully capture. So do you make discoveries in terms of extracurricular interests that the school can offer as a result of students having come out of that year?
Yeah, so when one of the things that we look at in Stratford and other schools would in transition year is mentoring programs, so that they would teach some of the junior students. So it's interesting, that's something that they're keen to continue doing when they're in 5th year, maybe not so much in 6th year when they're very focused on their exams. There might be clubs, that they enjoyed doing and they want to continue them into senior cycle. So something like Nathan would do chess with the students over the last year, and kind of to continue that on. But around careers, I think it gives them a good sense, a good drive going into 5th year as to maybe what they don't want to do, because work experience is a huge part of transition year, and students are encouraged not to, maybe work in a cafe or the local shop, because they might be doing that as their summer work anyway. It is to really try and get good work experience placements. And sometimes they'll say, oh, actually, miss, I realise that's not for me. I thought I was really interested in the world of medicine, maybe being a nurse, and they got some work experience in a hospital, and they said, actually, I don't think that's what I want. So there's different things certainly they bring that they might like to see in 5th year. We have to keep obviously to the curriculum, but their learning style, I would see, is the biggest shift, as opposed to us adding things to what they'll be learning.
Yeah, I suppose it's a really important lesson to learn as early as possible, isn't it, really? What you know you definitely don't want to spend the rest of your life doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
I suppose a more general question, how do the general public regard the teaching profession in the Republic of Ireland at the moment?
Well, Christopher, believe it or not, there's an article today in one of our main newspapers, and the heading is "They feel they're at a dead end. Why so many teachers are leaving school." Now, I love my job, so I don't want to be over negative about it, but I think at the moment there is the public regard for teachers, a sense that yes, they may be overworked. The rent is very high, particularly in Dublin, for young teachers to be able to work here. But we're just coming off the back of much longer summer holidays than you have. So some of the public here would feel that teachers have quite an easy job of it. But I think the reality is far from that. And it is getting more and more difficult to get young people into the teaching profession, to qualify over 2 years and to stick at it. We're losing a lot of teachers to go abroad. They feel they're getting better money, better salaries, and there is a housing crisis here, which is really hitting teachers hard.
Thank you, Nathan. Any thoughts on that one?
I suppose teachers have always enjoyed high levels of confidence and trust. We like to think, and I certainly like to believe in my school anyways, that our parents put a great deal of trust and belief in us, because they know what we do with their students, both academically, personally, socially. But again, like Delia is saying, there's huge amounts of pressure now. I suppose financially and economically, like a lot of other professions as well. Simply trying to attract people into jobs over the summer. There, one of the statistics from one of the main websites where teaching jobs are advertised was kind of the beginning of August. There was about 300 jobs still advertised. With only a couple of weeks to the beginning of term, so. We lose a lot of teachers to go abroad, as Delia was saying, where quality of life, salary might be better. But to be honest with you, I feel like that, as Delia said, I love my job. I love what I do. And I think at the core of every teacher is, is that passion, that vocation, really. I suppose, in times of change, our teaching unions come out and they express views and teachers weigh in behind that or not. And so, sometimes the public perception of teachers can sometimes take hits in that sense. I don't sometimes think that the public perception of teachers always reflects, the actual hard work that teachers do on the ground. But for me, I do feel that teachers do enjoy a high level of trust and confidence, generally speaking, and that's reflected in the types of students that come out of schools and the high level of the high standard rather of education in Ireland, I believe.
Well, that's certainly good to hear, Nathan, because it's a topic of conversation that recurs almost weekly here on the other side of the Irish Sea. Thank you both for that really helpful description of the system as it is at the moment then. In the next section of the show, I'd like to explore a little bit more about the imminent reforms to the senior cycle that we've been hinting at and their assessments and what these might mean for schools and their students. And we'll be right back after this.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books, perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, Computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
GCSE and A-level results from around the UK, as well as results for Scotland students, have all now been released. And whilst all media outlets have covered the headline figures, comments by exam bodies, teachers and pupils, the BBC has also included a feature posing a key question. Do rewards boost exam grades? The feature on the family and education part of the news website focuses on whether the promise of jewellery, gifts or cash for grades can actually motivate teens to do better in their exams. Some of the young people spoken to say they don't think the rewards they received really made a difference because they were already quite ambitious. However, others said the reward of money or gifts did help with keeping focused when it was a subject they didn't like or they were feeling distracted. One parent said their child had spent an extra hour looking at their books rather than playing video games because of the rewards on offer. Another parent noted, "You don't want to build up too much pressure." Experts say the effectiveness of rewards depends on the student and their relationship with learning. Rewarding effort rather than grades can be a far more long-term and sustainable strategy for parents. Psychologists in the article also warn that rewards can create tension within friendship groups or place pressure on parents financially. One secondary head teacher pointed out, "From early on I like to emphasise the intrinsic value of education. That will yield the best outcomes." For detailed analysis of national data, regional comparisons and other key groups, education media outlets have it all covered. Sticking with GCSEs, the TES magazine reports that exam papers from 2 boards were affected by a cyber attack back in February. Ofqual says students can have full confidence in their results, although it declined to divulge any further details of the impact of the attack. AQA and Pearson confirmed that one of their suppliers was the victim of a cyber attack, but that they had contingency plans in place for managing such incidents. Ofqual Chief Sir Ian Bockham said, "We worked very hard with the National Cyber Security Centre and obviously with the DFE to make sure that there was no impact at all on students' exams and on the integrity of the exam series." Sir Ian was asked why the attack was not announced at the time, but he responded by saying he wanted to focus on the achievements of students, but confirmed that cybersecurity was a high priority for all exam boards. Schools Week reports that the government has announced it will invest £70 million into expanding cadet forces, pledging to increase capacity by 30% by 2030. With a balance between school and community-based units created. The expansion of cadets was recommended in the government's Defence Review and comes less than a year after the Department for Education cut its contribution to school-based schemes. The Ministry of Defence did not confirm the number of units planned for schools, but suggested these could be in disadvantaged areas. It is not known how much of the funding will be earmarked for schools. According to Schools Week, there are currently more than 500 school-based cadet units, which have around 51,000 pupil members. Reaching the 30% expansion target would require roughly an additional 15,300 school-based cadets. A University of Northampton and Ministry of Defence study in April found participation in cadets was associated with improved school attendance, behaviour and attainment. Further details can be found on Schools Week. Finally, Schools Week also reports on a new appointment in the Conservative Shadow Cabinet. Saqib Bhatti was appointed Education Minister in the Opposition Leadership Group, and has pledged to hold Labour to account for their damaging policies and empty promises, whilst going on to say that education is the greatest enabler of social mobility and opportunity. He replaces Neil O'Brien in the reshuffle. Laura Trott, MP for Sevenoaks, remains in her post as Shadow Education Secretary. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back. I'm discussing the Irish education system tonight with Principal Nathan Barrett and Deputy Principal Delia Donohoe. Delia and Nathan have just provided us with a description of the current educational landscape in the Republic of Ireland, and I'd like to move on now to the issue of reforms to the senior cycle. So, Nathan, if I might bring in you first on this one, what reforms have been proposed and why are they deemed necessary?
Yes, so I suppose the headline is that every single subject in the senior cycle is going to be reformed in terms of its specification or curriculum. So that is starting this year with the first of our new subjects this year, which are the sciences, business, and a brand new subject called drama, theatre and film studies, and climate and sustainability. So I suppose, speaking personally, for music, my own subject, music, that curriculum has been around since the late 90s, 97, if I'm not mistaken, or 98. So, I suppose even the most basic idea that curriculums need to be updated to ensure that they are up to date, they're meeting the diverse skills of our students and the ever-changing, I suppose, economic, technological landscape in Ireland. So the headline, is that every single subject is having a new specification, a curriculum. The other main area of development is, as I mentioned earlier, the introduction assessment component or coursework or continuous assessment, I suppose, which will be worth a minimum of 40%. So these can be projects, research, studies. They could be things that are accessible in a pen and paper examination. So skills like research, project management, digital literacy, collaboration, critical thinking, and probably the most useful one is the practical application of things, scientific experiments or business case studies. So those are probably the biggest change structurally to the exams. Some exams would have had a practical or a non-pen and paper element before. I'm thinking things like music, as I mentioned, home economics, woodwork, the technologies. Those subjects would have always had different practical or project-based elements. And some subjects would have already had research studies such as classics and history. But this is bringing the value of those projects up to a minimum of 40%. And as I mentioned earlier, it allows students to access assessment and learning in different ways. So that key part, the additional assessment component, is probably the biggest change in terms of the landscape. Teachers are used to teaching new subjects or teaching new specifications rather, and that is a good thing. And teachers are open to change, and teachers are open to new ways and new subject and new curricula. But I suppose it's the new way of assessment, these additional assessment components, and how they're going to be managed in schools. How we're going to get CPD, to train teachers as to how the NCCA and the Department of Education want these to roll out. That's the main area, I believe. Really, all the subject curriculums are changing, but this additional assessment component is proving to be the biggest, I suppose, change and the biggest area of consternation for teachers at the minute.
And have there been any changes to the elements that are compulsory for study?
In terms of the subjects for leaving certificate, yes. The areas of study will change. Particularly in terms of, I suppose, English, the literature changes. New subjects such as drama, theatre, and film studies will focus on particular pieces of drama, pieces of film, and pieces of theatre, which will rotate around. So yes, I'm sure that there will be changes. The thing is as well that we don't know the answers to some of these questions. This year is the first year for the first subjects, the sciences, our biology, physics, chemistry, agricultural science, and business, but we don't have anything concrete yet for some of the subjects that are to be released. Music, for example, is due to come online for the first time in 2027, but as yet there is no, I suppose, draft curriculum or anything like that. So it's almost the down to the wire element of it that you might have a year to try and prepare yourself to introduce a brand new curriculum, causing worry for teachers.
So, are some of the subjects then being staggered? It sounds like they are. The introduction of some of them is it staggered in a formally predictable way, or are you waiting for stuff to come out from the syllabus providers?
Yeah, no, so they are being, there are 5 different tranches, they're calling them, or 5 different staggered years. So 2025 is the first year, and it's our sciences, as I said, a couple of new subjects. And then the last segment, or the last tranche, will be in 2029. So between 25 and 29, every single year, there will be new subjects, or new specifications rather, introduced. So we can see, we know what they are, but we just don't know what they're going to be yet.
I'm asking this question in the hope that the answer is yes. So there's been no sudden decision then to overnight change the entire way your students are given grades, say from letters that mean something to numbers that mean something as yet to be determined.
So, well, that change from letters to numbers came a couple of years ago, and they went from A1, A2, B1, B2, etc. Now they're simply given numbers. So students at senior cycle study their subjects at a higher or ordinary level, and they are given numbers then. So 1 being the highest number you can get, right down to 8, and 1 is from 90 to 100%. And then it goes staggered down through the percentages. So that change came in a number of years ago, yeah.
So you've all had time to process that then?
We've had time to process that, and that wasn't such a hard change, I don't think. I think it was like anything, it takes time to get used to these things. But yeah, no, that was a couple of years ago now. So we're looking at the more substantive, I suppose, changes in terms of curriculum and actual subject development now.
Thank you. And Delia, have any changes been mooted to the transition year model? Is there any attempt to impose a tighter shape on that, or are the central bodies still quite happy for schools to design their own programs?
Yeah, Christopher, just to follow on to one comment there with Nathan and yourself, just at senior cycle, one of the really important things about the senior cycle reform is the learning outcome model. So that is for all year groups now, and I think it's on the back of the junior cycle, and it's a very good thing. It's an important, when we're thinking about senior cycle reform, and for teachers and for students, most importantly, what that means is a focus on what students should actually know and the skills, as opposed to the rote learning. So that really is, apart from just the continuous assessment components, this real push to give them skills to be able to deal with any exam paper on the day, rather than expect a particular type of question which maybe came up every 5 years. So that's just a point I wanted to make there on the senior cycle reform. But the TY programme, the transition year programme this year, so September 2025, we've very clear guidelines. So, I mean, any school can be inspected by the department who offers transition year to ensure that they're covering the 4 key areas that Nathan mentioned earlier on. Because the danger is that some schools might fall in to what they are absolutely not supposed to do, and that is to start teaching the senior cycle courses. So maybe not at the prescribed texts, say for Shakespeare, because that'll change in 5th year, but you might be tempted to do a little bit of your maths and prep your students. But senior cycle is a 2-year course in which you do your Leaving Cert, and transition year is meant to be a standalone. So it's very welcome that there are very clear guidelines September 2025 for what we should be doing with this new model. And the students should have a huge say as well on what they want their transition year programme to look like.
Okay, so it's about giving the students the agency to make decisions about what that program looks like. How's your school adapted to those regulations?
Very well, to be honest. We have a TY coordinator who's been working in the school for a long time, and her background is SPHE, which is really important subject that the students do right through. So it is social, personal and health education. So her own commitment to the individual comes across in her transition year program. So it changes very much based on the cohort of students that we have. So some of the courses that we do, and me and Nathan, we put the timetable together. We change those. So Chinese, is running this year. The public speaking will be there. We're doing from the ground up. So that's a really exciting new program that we've brought in. And we're in Dublin, in the heart, very close to the city. So a lot of our students wouldn't be very familiar with growing vegetables or tomatoes and strawberries. So we have a wonderful science teacher who's brought that in based on the interest of the students last year. So it's very exciting, Christopher, that the TY module, there's clear guidelines as to the key skills, but each school can come up with programs that reflect the students in their school.
And I suppose, given that flexibility, you might wonder too how the staff get involved in running that. Do you rely on external providers, or do you find that staff are particularly keen to run an area that's perhaps outside of their subject expertise?
Yeah, I think for us, what we've seen is staff who maybe have hobbies that we may not have known about so much before, and they've got involved. And there's guidelines again around how you would create that module so that there's good structure and real learning taking place. So some of the staff would take it on. Then for something like Chinese, we would be hiring people externally to come in to work with the students. But firstly, you're looking at the skill set of your staff. So my own daughter is going into transition year. She's very excited about it. And a lot of the work she's going to be doing is GAA, which is to do with football and hurling here in Ireland, sports. So wonderful in a co-ed, boys and girls, we get an opportunity to do sports leadership courses. So again, that must reflect some of the skill sets on the staff in that school.
That sounds really exciting, actually, making that decision about which areas of expertise you draw in from outside and which you retain within your own staff body. That sounds quite an exciting way to run a school.
Yes, brilliant. It's absolutely, and it's that buy-in from the staff. We're really lucky in our school, but I'm hearing more and more about really exciting, different modules going on in schools. Because yourself, teachers, they're more than their subject. You find out suddenly that someone maybe is brilliant at rock climbing and is prepared to do, 6-week rock climbing course with your transition year students. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, you'd like to hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And Nathan, you mentioned this idea of looking for alternatives to pen and paper exams, which is an interesting thing to be looking at this particular moment in time. Over here in the UK, quite a lot of our universities are quite anxious about any of their courses that don't involve pen and paper exams and are looking to move back towards reinstituting those as their primary assessment mode, largely because of the hidden threat of AI. How do you think, particularly in the arts and humanities subjects, that threat might be countered when these senior cycle reforms start to become embedded?
Yeah, I suppose the perceived threat of AI is one that is causing quite a lot of discussion and debate amongst teachers. The frustration coming from the fact we were promised guidelines on how to deal with AI, over a year ago from the Minister of Education then. And it's proving frustrating because, I believe AI needs to be embraced, but, it has to be embraced in the right way, and we have to teach our students how to use it properly. And certainly, moving towards coursework and things like that, student completing their coursework entirely through AI is not the right way to use it. So the guidelines issued on AI are scant, if non-existent at the minute. The only guidance is that we are allowed students are allowed to use AI, provided they reference it in their bibliographies. So that is the kind of the debate at the minute, is how do we manage this? How are we going to manage this? What do we do? I think the concern is that, nobody wants to be that teacher that says, well, look, I think Nathan has used AI to create this entire project. What do I do now? Because, it could be worth 40% of Nathan's final grade. And if I am not sure that it's his, do I refuse to grade it? Do I refuse to submit it? These are the questions the teacher are asking, and there is no answer forthcoming as yet. To my mind, I would likely see that anything that is going to be submitted to our State Examinations Commission will have to be completed under strict supervision, and teachers will have to be satisfied that the work that they receive was conducted under their own supervision. So to that end, whether schools put in safeguards against AI or generating it during school time, or whether they have to train students. We are planning, it's a huge area, AI, and as I say, I'm passionate about, it being used in the correct way. I think we have no choice but to figure out how to use it in the correct way, particularly in education. And you mentioned third level as well. We need to teach students how to use it in the right way. It can be an extremely useful tool, but it can be wrong as well, as we know. It's very easy to Google something and to get the wrong answer sometimes. And in the same way, it's very easy to ask AI to write you an essay about something, but for it to be wrong. So what we really need is really clear guidelines on how this is going to be rolled out. How do we ensure that students, or try to ensure that students, are using it properly? And also guidelines from the NCCA or the Department of Education on the idea that if a student has used AI, how can we satisfy ourselves that it's not completely the work of auto-generated text, or has the student just simply got ideas from it, or have they just asked ChatGPT to write their whole essay for them? What do we do in a scenario like that? That's what teachers need. They need practical advice on how to deal with the potential issues that may arise when using AI.
Yeah, it's an interesting area, isn't it? I mean, over here we had to wait a long time for any guidelines to be published. And I think that was partly due to the fact we had a general election going on, but it was also partly due to the fact that it's such a fast-moving area that I think quite a lot of government ministers were quite nervous about putting down some rules that were going to be outdated by the time the document landed in staff inboxes. We do have now some fairly clear guidelines on what we are allowed to accept and what we're not allowed to accept. Although it's made more complicated here by the fact that we have about 3 different non-ministerial government agencies that are responsible for overseeing that. So we have the Curriculum Authority, we have the exam regulator, essentially, we have the exam boards themselves, and then we have the DFE on top of that. But in our case now, we've been instructed by the most recent document that if any teacher suspects that the work isn't the student's work, then they are not allowed to sign it off. Now, we don't quite know what happens beyond that, and I imagine there'll be test cases coming up in the next couple of months, maybe years, that will perhaps make that a bit clearer for us. But in terms of our assessments, at most, apart from subjects like design and technology and art, in any essay-based subjects, our coursework is capped at a maximum of 20% of that final grade award. So in our case, most of our subjects and most of our students' performance in our subjects comes down to how well they still perform in that exam room, particularly in my subject, English. We moved from a 60-40 exam to coursework ratio to an 80-20 quite some time ago, and you can get a fantastic piece of coursework out of students. In our case, 2 literary critical essays on anything they've chosen to write about themselves. But if they don't do it in the exam, they're going to struggle. Delia, how do you think the Irish system should be responding to the challenge of AI in a subject like classics, for instance?
Well, I mean, this is at the moment, the biggest challenge alongside, differentiation in the classroom, including all your learners, currently in classics at Leaving Cert, we have a 20% research study report, and very similar to what you'd said, Christopher, for us. If it is not the student's work, I do not sign off on it. Nathan, as principal, wouldn't sign off on it. Thankfully, I've not been in that position, but what is it that happens? The guidelines are not as clear as we would like. The humanities definitely is the area that will be watched very closely. The temptation is huge for students. I am concerned. I hope that there's good training for all of us as teachers. There is talk of, I know that the State Exam Commission had put out for, a computing company to come up with some software that would help with being able to identify AI quickly. But right now, it is a real worry across all different subject areas. And the way to solve it is, obviously, the work is done in the classroom, but we're already under pressure to cover the coursework as it is. There would have to be an oral component, a presentation piece of work, which is common at junior cycle with the classroom-based assessments, where obviously the student is presenting to you and not relying on AI for it. But if you have any tips, Christopher, they'd be much appreciated.
I don't know about tips, although I was just thinking while you were talking about that the idea of sitting students down and supervising them writing a coursework essay is quite challenging, isn't it? I mean, I only really got into the habit of sitting down at a desk for extended periods of time to write an essay. As a postgraduate, I spent most of my undergraduate years writing essays in snatches between lying on the bed and reading a book and trying to think of a good idea.
Yeah.
There's a whole kind of creative flow process that seems to be lost when we start to turn rooms that aren't exam rooms into something that resembles more of an exam room than it should.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I mean, this is the exciting part, was the continuous assessment, that it wouldn't become like an exam. Certainly with our junior cycle, just with the classroom-based assessments, very clear, very strict criteria for teachers. It is called a classroom-based assessment for that exact reason. Our second and third years, they complete them over 3 weeks in school with their teacher. So it's interesting, at junior cycle, we don't have the concerns, but yet at the high-stake exams, the Leaving Certificate, the concerns around AI are there.
And do these reforms have cross-party support in the Dáil, Delia? I mean, given the nature of the Irish political system at the moment, you might hope there would be a bit more stability with less of a big shift in government visions like we have over here. What does the Department for Education and Youth see as the purpose of them? And have they looked at some of the skills-based reforms that have taken place in Scotland, for instance?
Yeah, I think from the Dáil's perspective, there seems to be, the majority do agree with these reforms. There doesn't seem to be much pushback. Some parties obviously don't fully agree because they won't agree, because they're different parties, simply because the opposition is saying something. But I think the underlying feeling is absolutely the Leaving Cert high-stake exam, 100% on a written paper, is not good for any young person. So there's agreement there. The Department of Education, their vision certainly to reform is based definitely looking at the Scottish system. I would have heard papers on that in the past, but I'm not sure, Christopher, at the moment, how they're feeling once this reform is in place. I mean, the Scottish system for the humanities, they seemed to be very progressive with the coursework. I mean, for any input from you would be good here, or Nathan, on this, because my understanding was that Scotland was kind of put very much as an exemplary system for us to work off for our assessment.
Any thoughts on that, Nathan?
I suppose it comes down to the idea that parties can suggest these great ideas, and as I said before, teachers are always supportive of reforms or changes that would benefit students. So Yes, as it came from the national qualification in Scotland, that moved away from the reliance on a single final exam. What I suppose is the thing is that what we need in Ireland is the detail. I don't want to speak out of turn, but there's a tendency sometimes for politicians to have these big broad strokes, such as saying we're going to reform we're going to reform the senior cycle, we're going to do away with the 100% exam, and it's going to be 40% project, and it's all going to be wonderful. But what we need is the details, on the ground. What does that look like for me as a teacher, or for me as a principal in the day-to-day running of my classroom? So yes, the idea of reducing the pressure on this high stakes, exam on one day or on a couple of days, and also to come away from the idea of the rote learning is all very positive for developing, young people for the world as it is. What we need is actual clear guidelines as to how that actually works on a day-to-day basis. So there is broad support for reform, certainly on the government, but also on the ground. Of course, there's support for reform if it is beneficial and if it is clear what the reform is for and how we roll it out.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, the reforms you've mentioned certainly seem to raise a number of questions that schools and ministers will probably need to settle pretty early on as the new curriculum begins to take a practical shape in classrooms and examination halls across the Republic, because, of course, it's going to be people like you that are going to be making it actually come to life in the lives of the children that you teach. It's interesting because from the English perspective, there is a bit of a debate going on at the moment in England about whether the Scottish system is perhaps the best way forward. We seem to have found ourselves in a kind of relationship where England went for a knowledge-first curriculum and Scotland went for a skills-first curriculum, and perhaps there could be a little bit more rebalancing on either side. So it'd be interesting to see how things unfold for you. In the closing section of tonight's show, I'd like us to think about the role of the Central Admissions Office and how that helps in facilitating access to higher education in Ireland, and perhaps get your views on some of the possible post-18 alternative pathways to university that the Education Minister ought to be thinking about in the years to the end of the decade. And we'll be right back after this.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books, perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
Welcome back to the final part of tonight's show on the Irish education system with Nathan Barrett and Delia Donohoe. Nathan and Delia have given us a clear sense of what the education system currently does well and where it might do things better, and of the opportunities and challenges that come with an ambitious programme of senior cycle reforms. We turn now then to what comes after the age of 18 and to the current role of the Central Admissions Office in that conversation. So Nathan, what is the CAO system and how do Irish students use it to access universities?
So the Central Applications Office, or it's called here, is the system for applying to higher education or to universities for school leavers. So the system is there. It's seen as almost the be all and end all of a 6 years life when they're in the final year of school. So students, they browse their university websites and see what courses they might like, and key for a lot of them is how many points does this course need. So upon finishing their leaving certificate, they are awarded a certain number of points equated to the different grades that they will have attained in their exams, which will lead to them to get a total number of points. And it's this total that will enable them to access the university courses. So each course will have a certain number of points that will be the target for students. So students will browse the courses, they'll figure out what courses they might like, what subjects they want to study at college, and they will list them on CAO in up to 10 choices in order of preference. So they list them from 1 to 10, 1 being their very first choice that they would like to study, and 10 being the one that maybe if they really, really had to, they would go and study that. So it's a key point for the students when they're applying to CAO. In order to access the course, they must list it as high up as possible, because if they think they want to get their number one choice and it's worth 500 points, let's say, but they also have a second choice that's worth 300, they have no choice. Basically, at the end of the day, if they get enough points to access their first choice, they do not get to access any of the others on the list. So that's a key component of the course. So students will be applying for that kind of before Christmas. So it's the next couple of months is the key time for students to be preparing their applications and researching courses. A lot of that they will do in class time with our guidance counsellor in school. They'll be visiting open days. They'll be getting a sense of the different colleges that are around. And they need to have their application sort of, 70 to 80% there by Christmas. There are a number of opportunities throughout the year to change their choices. There is one after the Christmas holidays. And then we have mock examinations in most schools around the country, which is a practice run of the Leaving Cert in about February time. And after that, in March, April, CAO opens up again for students to just change their choices. So that, I hope, provided a brief overview of it.
Well, from an outside perspective, Nathan, and I have experience of taking students through both the CAO system and the UCAS system in my current school, the CAO system often strikes me as an outsider as being ruthlessly fair. But what problems does it pose in your experience?
So I suppose, like I mentioned before, if you must rank your choices in order of preference, because you will get the highest ranked one upon gaining those points. And it doesn't matter if you've changed your mind and you no longer want to study your first preference. If you have gained the course nearer the top of the list, you must do that course, basically. So that's one of the main ones, and that's one of the ones that's you need to get across to students, that they need to rely on their choices. I suppose one of the most significant criticisms of it is, the perpetual educational disadvantage of it sometimes, that comes with the points for CAO. And the points being, you want to get maximum points, essentially, really, no matter how many points your course is, students want to get the maximum number of points. So the whole system relies on the number of points that you get in your exams. And again, that leads us back to the conversation around the single high stakes exam. Sometimes, as well as is predicted this year, potentially, there will be this random selection or lottery. Because of all the changes that were made during COVID, they're being downplayed now this year for the first time. We had grade inflation over the last couple of years to account for missed school years during COVID, but that is the first time, this year is the first time rather, that is being decreased. So what we're hearing now in the media, or we have been hearing the last couple of days, is about this random selection or lottery. So even if you got the number of points that you were told you needed to get to study the course you would like, if that course is oversubscribed, then those students who have gained the number of points will go into a lottery, and it'll be chosen in that way. The whole grade inflation that was going on over the last number of years increased significantly. Grades were inflated by almost 8%. I think off the top of my head it was around 7.8% or 7.6% that grades were. Post marking, they were inflated by around that percentage. This year, they're only being inflated by just under 7, so it's 6 point something again, 6.7 or 8. So these factors now are leading students into potential difficulties. The idea as well that students who may have sat their Leaving Cert last year or the year before could be applying to CAO now, and with their increased or inflated grades that they would have got over the last year or two, they would be at more of an advantage when accessing the system this year.
Yeah, so there's always a currency problem, really, isn't there, about the difference between cohorts and what the value of each grade is from year to year. Is action being taken on that to look at trying to standardise the standard, I suppose, from year to year?
Well, action has been taken at the minute to standardise it back to the way it was, and this year the inflation was reduced by around 1%, and I can only assume that will continue over the next number of years to the point where grades are no longer being inflated, and to a point where there will be no difference between whether you did your Leaving Cert this year or last year. And on top of that, I suppose, you're looking at increasing course places for popular courses. You're looking at more funding into third level. And particularly, you want to be looking at increasing places in courses that are more in demand. And I suppose the other thing is that what the CAO lacks is any kind of recognition of a wider range of student skills or aptitudes or extracurricular achievements. Anything that you have done outside the classroom isn't counted. You don't get any points for them, unfortunately. I suppose that's one of the things I suppose that UCAS might differ on, is that you can get credit for outside things. I know, particularly myself, having done A-levels and having been a musician, I got credit for having done grades on my piano, all those hard years of work, and I got a few UCAS points out of it. But the exclusion of kind of anything other than what you did on the day, basically, is one of the main things as well.
It's interesting to hear that perspective. Delia, what about those students that don't secure the place they were hoping for at university? What options are available to them at the moment?
Yeah, so our students will find out, their offers will come out this week through the CAO, whether or not they've been successful or not. Some of them will go to a second round of offers if they're disappointed, if they don't get an offer on the first round. But the stats are quite high, actually, as to the number of students who get the CAO places that they were hoping for. But there are other options, certainly, for students, and it's really important that they're made aware of that, because there is very much a tradition, as Nathan said, this obsession with the CAO and thinking that that's the be all and end all for everything after secondary school. So one of the options that students can look at is called a PLC course, and that's a post-leaving certificate course. So there's different levels or grades, if you like, for courses. So a PLC course is at level 5 and 6, whereas most of the CAO courses are 7 and 8. There would be the odd course at 6. So if you don't get your CAO, there are PLC courses, but sometimes those courses, the places may be gone already because students will have made a decision early on to apply for a PLC course and they would have done an interview. But for some students, there will be disappointment, all right, Christopher, if they don't get their CAO offer. But the PLCs are a fantastic avenue to study for a year or two, and then that can bring you into the course that you originally wanted to do in the CAO, so you can progress into a CAO course, or it may bring you somewhere else that you'll end up being happier. And of course, there are apprenticeships for students who don't want to continue with their traditional studies. And another area just to think about, we're talking about the traditional Leaving Cert on the show this evening. There is also LCA, which is Leaving Cert Applied, which is a course with an uptake intake of about 4,500 students across the country. And that focuses far more on practical elements of subjects at senior cycle in 5th and 6th year, where there isn't a terminal exam at the end of it. And those students end up with their Leaving Cert applied qualification.
So in that qualification then, do the students study a group of subjects, or do they study one specific subject area?
So they study a group of subjects. So they would have their literacy and numeracy. It would be communicative English is what they would focus on, rather than literary texts. And then depending, it might be more kind of manual subjects, like with woodwork and tech. Some may go into beauty therapy and hairdressing. So there's choice and there's core subjects as well with the LCA.
Okay, thanks. That's interesting to hear about that. And how are the universities coping at the moment in Ireland? Do they have enough money? Are students applying for courses that they are going to be satisfied with by the time they leave? Or is there more work to be done there?
I'm sure all the universities would want more money. That's not something now that I don't know about you, Nathan, but that's not an area I would hear students talk about too much. Certainly university lecturers perhaps, but I wouldn't hear that on the ground now in secondary school.
Yeah, no, I think, as Delia said, I'm sure universities would all like more money. I think the question about are students satisfied with the qualification they come out with at the end of it is an interesting one, and I suppose it questions, well, how do you quantify that satisfaction? Is that satisfaction the attainment of a job and a salary at the end of your course, or is that satisfaction purely the acquisition of the knowledge? I think we'd be naive to think that they'll all be satisfied if they just enjoy their 3 years and they know a bit more about whatever subjects they have done. But I think, for me, I would always advise students to study something you love. Pick what you love doing. What's your favorite thing to do? What's your favorite subject? What do you love doing? Go and study that in university, and you can figure the rest out. I mean, personally, I studied music at university for probably the sole reason that was pretty much the only subject I was any good at in school. Without too much thought as to what I would do afterwards. I mean, I had a couple of years to figure it out, and I went into teaching, and as it turned out, I loved doing that. But for me, I suppose, when students are choosing a university or thinking about why they might go somewhere, unfortunately, it's probably not as much just them choosing something they love to do and are passionate about. Not to get into the dissatisfaction and things, but particularly in Ireland and in Dublin at the minute, there's this whole cost of living stress. The government have increased this, what they call the student contribution fee. In theory, university is free for students in Ireland, but they have what they call a student contribution fee, which is their way of making it not free. So it's the cost of living, accommodation, and financial, stress. It would be lovely to think that students could just go to whatever university they liked because they want to go and study that course because they have a passion for it, and hopefully they'll be doing a job afterwards that they enjoy. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes it can come down to economics, and can we afford to send our child down to a different county or across the country and pay for accommodation and everything like that? But I think universities are constantly adapting. They are looking at where the career is going to be, and they are constantly upskilling. I do work for University College Dublin and Dublin City University, and for me working in those environments, it is always constantly about thinking how we can prepare students. I work in the teacher training departments of both universities, so we're thinking about how do we prepare these people who are going to be teachers in 2 years or 3 years. There's been obviously a huge shift towards technology and things like that, and of course there's a huge shift, I think, across the board in universities, and we mentioned it earlier, in how we approach technology and how we ensure that students are prepared for the world that they're going to be going out to work in 3 to 4 years.
Interesting then, isn't it? So I suppose it does come back partly to skills again, this sense of being prepared once you leave your 3-year, 4-year university course to then go out into the world and find something that you're going to be good at in the employment market. Over here, the debate really is kind of much, much more geared towards what students expect to get out of university in terms of a job, and then economic prospects once they're in the marketplace. Delia, is that your sense of things, or is there still hope?
Oh, I think there's always hope. Bringing my classics here, thanks to Pandora, there'll always be hope, Christopher. I think what Nathan is saying there, it is the student voice and not the parent voice. I think the job piece, and again, like, we're very lucky here that university, as Nathan said, it's meant to be free compared to the huge costs for your students. I think it is a real moment of wonder for the students. It's really exciting that they get with the CAO to put down all of these courses that they want to study because they have passion and love. And of course, sometimes they'll say, oh, miss, I love your classics, but I'm never going to get a job out of that. I mean, it's just silly for me to be studying this. I should go on and do something where I'm guaranteed. And I said, folks, you're going to be working long enough. Classics will give you an ability to critically think for yourselves. And that's a skill that you'll need in any workplace. So I think those of us who see teaching as a vocation, Christopher, there is absolutely always hope that they're not studying for the job and the paycheck at the end of it. It's the absolute love of learning.
Fantastic. So my last question to you then for the evening, Delia. I don't think we've got time for 3 changes that you would make to the education system if you were education minister, but perhaps one. What would be the one thing you'd like to see come out of all of this whirlpool of reform over the next few years?
My goodness, one thing. Well, I hope the vision that the Department of Education have set out with the reform becomes a reality, and that teachers allow it to happen, and that they embrace this skill-based learning with the continuous assessment. But it can only happen with the right training and helping us as teachers to navigate the world that is AI. So I am excited for these reforms for the young people coming up through my classes. So let's hope we get the right supports in place, and that what we see coming down the road is nothing but positive for these fabulous young people. And inclusive is so important of every student with additional learning needs, that they are supported to succeed in this new system.
Thank you. And Nathan?
Again, it's very hard to think of one thing. I suppose, speaking just as what pops to mind, speaking just the CEO in our last, I suppose the parity of esteem, I suppose I'm talking between our CAO system and our amazing systems of further education, apprenticeships, PLCs. The idea that one must go to university after school to succeed needs to be removed. That idea is no longer, I think, feasible or practical or even realistic. And it's just not suitable for all students. By the time a student has finished, 14 years in education, really, they can be sick of sitting in a classroom all day. And the model of university is still attending class, taking notes, doing exams, doing projects. That just doesn't fit. But yet this idea that we must go to university is still out there. Students must do what is right for them. And as Delia mentioned, students of all abilities. We have students who are well capable of going to college and will thrive and will love it. And so they should. But we also have students who may be unable to go to college for whatever reason, may not want to do a university degree. But there is no parity of the sense or there's no reaching that parapet of CAO yet. We need to have more parity between the options post leaving cert, or even post junior cert for some students as well. That they have options and pathways to go down.
Well, thank you very much. And if anyone from the Education Department listens back to this show later this week, I hope they'll have their notebook and pen at the ready, because we've covered a huge range of topics this evening. It's been fascinating to hear all about the current and future direction that Irish education seems to be heading in, and to get your expert thoughts on what this change might mean for the students you teach and guide. Seems to me that whenever new reforms are mooted in an education system, one always wonders precisely just how long the politicians will be prepared to let them run for before deciding that tinkering is required. So it will be interesting to see how these new reforms take shape in the next 3 terms and beyond. You've certainly given our listeners some important questions to consider as schools begin to open up again after the long summer break over here. So thank you both very much indeed for giving us the benefit of your enthusiasm, knowledge and wisdom this evening. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Christopher. Pleasure.
Thanks a million, Christopher.
Thank you very much.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk picture books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
And so we reach the end of another Sunday Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio, the home of education conversation. Thanks to Nathan Barrett and Delia Donohoe for being such great company this evening. I hope you found tonight's discussion thought-provoking and instructive, and that you will approach any new curriculum, assessments or responsibilities that await you at the start of a new academic year with the optimism, energy and enthusiasm of tonight's guests. If you haven't already done so, you can help us bring more of our content your way by subscribing to our Teachers Talk Radio social media accounts, leaving a review of our shows on your preferred podcast provider, or considering getting in touch with a request to appear as one of our guests. If you are a classroom-based teacher or have some other close connection to the teaching profession, then we would love to hear from you. So check out our website at www.ttradio.org and give us the opportunity to put your voice on the air. Do check out our other Teachers Talk radio shows this week. We have a number of new hosts continuing to make their debuts. So look up the schedule on the website and give them a listen if you can. This week and every week on Teachers Talk Radio, there is simply so much excellent content to engage with from real teachers working with real students in real schools. You can find anything you've missed of the 2,500 shows, I think, so far at www.ttradio.org. And if you have something you want to say or ask others about education anywhere on planet Earth, then perhaps you should consider applying to join the station as a show host. We are always on the lookout for those with current or recent experience of the classroom and other less familiar educational settings. That's all from me for this evening. So thank you for listening, and we will speak again in September. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.